Good morning, dear students, or whatever time you're watching this video. My name is Blessing. In today's class on cognitive psychology, we are going to be discussing the fourth lecture, which is decision making and judgment. Today, we would focus on decision making and its types, decision making models, judgment processes, and cognitive biases. We make decisions every day, and we make use of judgment in our everyday living. It could be when making a minor decision relevant to our daily living, or when making a major decision that is necessary for our growth and success in life. Decision making and judgment. Decision making is a multifaceted cognitive process that results in selecting the best alternative among various options. This means that when making a decision, you have to have various or several options to choose from. For example, when you're picking an outfit to wear for a particular function or to a particular lecture, or when going for an interview, you have several options to choose from. So the act of picking the best alternative among those options that you have is decision making. It encompasses several stages such as problem identification, information gathering, evaluating alternatives, and making a choice. When making a decision, you have to first and foremost identify the problem. You have to recognize the problem you are trying to solve. You gather information about the particular problem. You could also divide it into manageable units to allow for easy understanding. You then evaluate the alternatives that you have, checking for the pros and cons of each of these alternatives, and then lastly you make a choice. Effective decision making often involves not only logical reasoning but also emotional and social considerations. For your decision making to be considered effective, you have to think about, or you have to put into consideration, the emotional and social factors. You do not just consider the logics or the facts or evidences that come into play. You also have to consider emotional factors, social factors, and even environmental factors around you. Judgment. Judgment is the cognitive process of evaluating and forming opinions about information and situations. Unlike decision making, which usually results in action, judgment is primarily evaluative and reflects an individual's perceptions and interpretations. Judgment is, of course, a mental process, and it involves forming opinions or conclusions based on the available information that you have about a particular subject. For example, an employer makes use of judgment when he wants to hire the perfect worker for his company. The available info he puts into consideration is the qualities of the person, the experiences, the qualifications that the person has gathered over the years, and many other factors. Also, when you want to get something from a supermarket, there could be several brands of that particular object. So you have to put into consideration the prices, the quality, and the quantity of those brands before judging or coming to conclusion about the one you would like to get. Let's move on. The types of decision making. There are several types of decision making written down here, and they are grouped based on the alternatives. The first is the programmed versus the non-programmed decisions. Programmed decisions usually follow a set procedure or established guidelines because they often deal with reoccurring or routine problems. An example is when a company or an institution decides that, okay, on this particular date, we are going to be paying our employees, we are going to be paying our workers. That is an example of a program decision, because paying salaries occurs every month. And so to tackle that particular issue, the company has decided that on this particular day of the month, every worker should have been paid or should be paid. Non-program decisions are made in response to unique or unstructured problems that do not have a predefined solution. So it requires creativity and critical thinking because it involves uncertainty. When it comes to non-program decisions, you do not know what you're dealing with. You do not have a set procedure or an established guideline on how to go about it. So you have to think critically and you have to engage your creativity. An example is when a student who just completed his secondary school education is deciding on a course to study. You might decide to study medicine and surgery because it's the most lucrative, or it's one of the most lucrative courses in Nigeria. Or you can choose to study biochemistry because that is what you would love to do. So that is an example of a non-program decision. There is no set procedure or guideline, so you have to think critically for what you would be able to excel in. The next are strategic versus tactical versus operational decisions. Strategic decisions are high-level long-term choices that shape the direction of an organization, business, or individual. This means that strategic decisions often deal with making long-term choices. It's not about the now, but it often deals with the present, the future, and years after. An example is when a tech company decides that they are going to be making use of renewable technology or renewable energy for a long period of time. That is an example of a strategic decision. Tactical decisions focus on medium-term plans and are made to implement strategic goals efficiently. They are more flexible and adjustable. An example is when a company decides to engage in seasonal pricing discounts to boost sales. When Jumia decides that, okay, we are going to have a Black Friday on so dates, and prices on most of our commodities and goods are going to be reduced by a particular percent to ensure that people buy and people patronize us a lot. That is an example of a tactical decision. They implement strategic goals efficiently and it helps them to get more sales. Operational decisions are short-term day-to-day decisions that ensure the smooth functioning of an organization. Even individuals use operational decisions from time to time. An example is making a to-do list every day to ensure that you have a set time for an activity so that you do not have a lot to do at a particular time and you follow a guideline you've already written down, making the day less stressful and more engaging for you. Another example is when a company creates a weekly staff schedule to ensure the smooth running of the company. The next is rational versus emotional decisions. Rational decisions are made with logical reasoning, analysis, and objective evaluation of facts. For example, a doctor recommends a treatment based on medical tests or research. Rational decisions often involve considering the facts, evidences, truths, and other factors that could come to play. So you do not just rely on instincts or feelings. Rational decisions rely more on logics and facts. Emotional decisions are driven by feelings, instincts, and personal experiences rather than logic. This is the opposite of the rational decision. When it comes to emotional decisions, you are controlled more by your feelings, your instincts, and your personal experiences. For example, when you end a friendship in the heat of an argument rather than discussing the issue rationally, that is a perfect example of an emotional decision. That is why we are often advised not to make decisions when we are upset and not to make promises when we are too happy. The next is individual versus group decisions. Individual decisions are made by one person without consulting others. So yes, when you want to make a personal decision, most of the time you don't have to consult any other person, especially when it has to do with your daily living. An example is choosing an outfit to wear for a program, or when a businessman decides to give a small discount to a loyal customer. Group decisions are made by multiple people who discuss and collaborate to find the best solution. When it comes to group decisions, you have to have two or more people because they have to discuss and they have to cooperate and collaborate to find the best alternative. An example is when a jury deliberates on the verdicts in a trial, or when a school committee decides on a new curriculum. So they have to collaborate and cooperate to choose the best option for whatever they are deciding on. And we also have other types of decisions, but we are not going to talk about them today. It's always good for us to go online and search for other types of decisions so that we are vast about them. The next we are going to be discussing is decision making models. Decision making models are patterns or ways through which decisions can be made. The first here is rational decision making model. This involves making logical and objective decisions, and it often relies on facts, evidences, and logics. An example is when an employer is choosing supplies. So such an employer can thoroughly evaluate the quality, the price, and the delivery times of the supplies. The next is bounded rationality model. This acknowledges limitations in information processing. It was proposed by Herbert Simon, and it suggests that people do not always make perfectly rational decisions because of cognitive limitations, time constraints, and incomplete information. An example is when an individual wants to buy a laptop. So instead of researching on every brand or every model, the person might choose to buy a laptop that meets their basic requirements within their budget, even if it's not the best solution at that time. So bounded rationality model acknowledges that there is a limitation on information processing, and it could be due to limited time or cognitive limitations. The next is intuitive decision-making model. This values gut feelings or instincts. There are times when you make decisions not because of your past experiences or not because of what people tell you, but because you just feel that that is the best decision you could make concerning that subject at that time. that is when intuitive decision making model comes to play. An example is when an investor relies on his intuition to make quick investment decisions, and this reflects their years of experience. You just think that, oh, I think this is the best idea, this is the best solution, or this is the best investment I could make. The next is garbage can model. This describes decision making in chaotic and fluid environments. An example is when creating ideas for a product development. Different ideas can arise from diverse teams without a formal agenda, and this results in sporadic decisions based on immediate opportunities. Now we move to judgment processes. These are the processes that are involved when making sound judgment. The first is information processing. You have to effectively evaluate vast amounts of data, and it is crucial for sound judgment. For you to make a sound judgment, you have to evaluate a large amount of data. The second is cues and signals. People often make decisions based on subtle cues from the environment. Next is evaluation of alternatives. You have to discern the best course of action based on a set of criteria. And the feedback mechanism. It is important for refining future judgments. Feedback mechanism has to do with thinking about what went wrong, what could have been done better, what went well, and how that can help you when making future judgments or when you are deciding in the future. Cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are systematic errors in thinking, reasoning, and decision making that result from the way our brain processes information. They can lead to irrational or inaccurate judgments and decisions. The first here is the confirmation bias. This is the tendency to favor information that confirms existing beliefs. An example is when you're a fan of a particular musician, you only read news articles that support their views and you ignore contradictory information. Another type of bias is the anchoring bias. This relies heavily on the first information encountered. For example, a store prices a commodity at $50 but offers a discount to $30. You perceive the commodity as a good deal because of its initial price, and this happens a lot when, let's say, you want to order a particular commodity from Jumia and you say that, oh, the price of this thing was initially 15,000 and then they reduced it to 7,000, and you're like, I think this thing is of quality because of the initial price. Probably they offered a discount and you decide to go for that commodity. The reason why you decided to go for it is because you considered its quality due to its initial price. Another bias is the overconfidence bias. This is holding an overly positive perception of one's judgment. For example, a driver says he's a great driver and that he has never had an accident. He can proceed to speed, ignoring the potential risks because he feels overly confident in his abilities. Here we have hindsight bias. This is the belief that one could have predicted an event after it has occurred. For example, after a business idea fails, you say, I knew it was a bad idea, even though you had no idea of predicting the outcome. This happens to us most of the time. There are times when we make a decision and when it doesn't go well, we are like, I actually thought that this was a bad idea, but I just decided to go for it. So it's believing that one could have predicted an event after it has occurred. And the last here is the sunk cost fallacy. This is continuing an endeavor due to previously invested resources. So one could decide to continue investing in something even after knowing that it has failed. For example, you continue to invest in a failing business because of the resources you already committed, even though it makes no sense to do so. You could decide that I'll just continue spending money on this thing, even though I know that it's not going to work out because I've been investing in it for quite a while now. That is an example of the sunk cost fallacy. We've come to the end of today's class, and I'll be reiterating all that we discussed today. First, we started with the definition of decision making and judgment. We said that when you're making a decision, you have to have several options to choose from, and there are several processes that you have to go through when making a decision. You have to identify the problem, gather information, evaluate alternatives, and making a choice. We also said judgment is a mental process that deals with forming opinions and conclusions about a particular subject based on existing or available information. We went ahead to discuss the types of decision making based on the grouping. We talked about the programmed and the non-programmed decisions, the strategic, tactical, and operational decisions, the rational versus emotional decisions, and the individual versus group decisions. We talked about the decision making models, and we also mentioned some examples. We discussed the judgment processes, the processes that you have to go through when making sound judgment. You have to process information, you have to get cues and signals, you have to evaluate alternatives, and after making a decision, you have to have or make a feedback mechanism. Think about what could have been done better, think about what went well and what didn't, and how you can do better in the nearest future. We also discussed the cognitive biases, and we said there are systematic errors in thinking, reasoning, and decision making that may result from the way our brain processes information. We mentioned the confirmation bias, the anchoring bias, the overconfidence bias, the insight bias, and the sunk cost fallacy. Thank you very much for listening today, and I hope that you learnt one or two things. I hope to see you in the next class, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, and see you in the next class.